Hey there. It's been a while, and I'm really glad that you stopped by. My name is Marrash, and I'd like to welcome you to this 5th season of Large Format Friday. You know, over the last few months, I've been forcing myself to slow down and really appreciate all of the awesome people and pretty cool things in my life. There is one thing, though, that I've been holding really close to my chest for almost a year, and I think it's time to share it with you. This is the Canham 12x20. Today I want to talk about how we got here, some of the challenges of ultra large format photography, and some of my first results with it. If this is your first time stopping by the channel, every other week we're going to be here and we're going to be chatting about something large format, or should I say ultra large format. So if you're new to LF or ULF, ultra large format is something that is larger typically than 8x10 inches, but really it applies to anything outside the standard or more common large format sizes. That is 4x5, 5x7, 8x10, those aren't ULF, but 2x3, 3x4, 7x11, 7x17, 12x20, 20x24, all of those other funky film sizes are gonna apply to ULF. This can present some interesting challenges, and I'm going to talk a little bit about those as we go along. But first off, this thing right here. So the Canham 12x20 and I go back quite a ways. In fact, this was one of the first ULF cameras I ever got to see. It was October of 2010. I'd only been shooting an 8x10 inch camera for about 2 months, and I was in New York City visiting the PDN Photo Plus Expo, where I was going to do a guest spot with this cool new film podcast, the Film Photography Podcast. I was meeting up with Michael Rosso and Dwayne Polkue to do a quick interview, and while we were touring the floor at the PDN Photo Plus Expo, we went to the Kodak booth, and there at the Kodak booth, Mr. Keith Canham, the maker of this camera, was there with one of these babies. As soon as I saw it, I was smitten. I just knew this was something I was gonna have one of these days. I had no idea how I was gonna get it, and up until about a year ago, I still didn't have an idea. But I just loved it. When I was working with Keith and asking him what felt like a million questions, he let me get hands-on with the camera, focus it under the dark cloth, do all the things that really makes a customer for life. And every time after that, whenever I would meet Keith at a trade show or otherwise, I would say, it's coming, one of these days I'm gonna have one. It's still kind of surreal to see one right here next to me, and it's real, and it's mine, and it's pretty cool. But wait a second, aren't ULF cameras like crazy expensive? If you're buying one new, and if you're buying a nice one used, yeah, they are not cheap. They're definitely a luxury item and a bit of a flex in the world of any sort of photography. You're sending a message by showing up with a big camera like this. So in the interest of transparency, I didn't pay a dime for this camera. In fact, I worked it off. All of those skills I'd polished making videos week to week for LFF allowed me to offer my content creation services in trade for this camera. It was definitely a lot of work and it took a lot longer than I thought, but I'm so glad I was able to make it happen because I really don't know that I would ever have the kind of disposable income to say, yeah, a 12x20 sounds good. So this was about the only way it was gonna occur. It wasn't just the camera body though, it was a complete package. So this came with the Canham 12x20 camera. The camera came with a really nice plexiglass ground glass protector, and not one, but 3 AWB walnut film holders, which normally 3 film holders doesn't feel like a lot, but in ULF, it is plenty. Okay, so shiny new camera, cool experience over. What are some of the challenges of getting into something as big as a camera like this? Well, let's start off with the obvious. It is a massive camera. Even though this camera is technically only about 5 pounds heavier than my Tachihara, it's a 5 pounds that's spread a lot further out. A heavier, large surface area camera is really gonna challenge and stress out even the best tripods. Earlier in season 1 of LFF, I did a video about considering tripods and tripod heads. I recommend going and checking that out if you haven't already, but the cliff notes are, you're looking for at least double your maximum capacity. So the camera plus the holder plus your heaviest lens stretched out, you wanna take that weight and double it. You need that in terms of capacity for the head as well as the legs. This combination that I've been using for my 8x10, the wrought iron Majestic head, as well as the legs, is heavy enough, except this larger surface area of the camera required me to get a different plate for my Majestic head. The plate that I had to change out for on this one is a 6" by 7" head. I'm guessing it's because of how far spread out the weight is. The total camera kit, by the way, this camera weighs about 17 pounds. The lens that's on it weighs about 5 pounds. My heaviest lens is like 6 pounds, add a couple pounds for the holder, so I need something with roughly 50 pounds of capacity in terms of the head and in terms of the legs. In a perfect world, I'd probably have a heavier duty Rees tripod with a really nice head, but with that extra 2 grand I'm saving by running on this, I can afford some more film, which is a pretty good deal. Okay, so we've got a big camera and we have a tripod and legs to hold it. Now we need some film and some holders for that film. If you're looking at ultra large format kits, either brand new or something that comes used, I recommend looking at kits that will come with a holder, especially if it's an older camera, which may not conform to the various different camera standards. There's a full episode from season 4 about camera standards and funky film sizes that I'm gonna link to. You need to make sure that you have holders that fit. So certain ULF, even though they use the same size film, may have completely different size holders. Now, if you're buying a camera new, I also recommend checking if that manufacturer makes their own film holders. In the case of like Chamonix and Shenhao, they're gonna provide those. Canham cameras doesn't make their own film holders, but that's okay. This camera came with 3 AWB walnut holders. These are probably the nicest film holders I've ever had with a camera. They are just spectacularly manufactured, really easy action, and they even have these nice little locking tabs. There's also a slightly lighter finish wood to mark when something is unexposed and the darker side when it is exposed. So just really well thought out and beautiful, really good craftsmanship. Once we've got those holders, we need to put some film in the camera. In terms of film, just last week, I announced the start of Ilford's ULF special order program. That's something that's held yearly. This year, they're going through August 19th, so you can get your special orders in before then. Ilford also has, earlier in the year, an Ortho ULF program that's already closed for 2022, but you can also get ULF sheet films from manufacturers like Adox, Shanghai, and then specialty ortholitho film from Ultrafine Online. I'm gonna have links in the description below to where you can pick those up. So we got a big camera with a big tripod, big holders, and big expensive pieces of cut film. Now we need to talk about lenses. This can be one of the most challenging things in assembling an ultra large format kit because going to bigger cameras alienates not just film stocks, but available lenses. Not all lenses are gonna be able to project a large enough circle of light to cover that big sheet of film. So taking my film holder here, if I have a piece of 12 inches high by 20 inches wide film, that's gonna give me a diagonal, using my Pythagorean theorem, of about 593 millimeters. Let's call it 600 millimeters. So when I'm looking up data sheets of lenses, I wanna make sure that the image circle that that lens casts is at, or preferably above, the image circle of the film that I need. In the case of the lenses I'm gonna show you, I have 4 that I found that work with my kit, 2 of which aren't supposed to cover, but that's also use dependent. Another thing to keep in mind. Let me go through them now. So this first lens that I have that works with ULF is my Schneider symmar-s 480 millimeter f8.4. This is a lens that I've had for a while, and when I work out in the field, it's a little too hefty for carrying around. For the size and weight of this, I can usually carry 2 other lenses or 1 more lens and extra film. So I opt usually for the lighter weight stuff. But in terms of sharpness and just how it looks, it's an awesome, awesome lens. I still love using this thing in the studio. And I was surprised to see when I use this for portrait distance work, it covers decently. When you're looking at image circle specifications, they're gonna tell you what the image circle is at infinity. That's when the image circle of your lens is the smallest. If you start pulling those bellows out further, meaning you're gonna focus closer and closer, the closer you focus, the larger that image circle goes. That means you can get a little bit more mileage out of a lens that may not cover. Now, don't go throwing 4x5 lenses on this. It's gonna be very disappointing and you're gonna be losing out on all that surface area. In terms of what this looks like, this 480 millimeter lens ends up being a little wider than standard. You can also take that film diagonal and call that roughly your standard focal length. So on a 12x20, a 600 millimeter lens, that's wild, is about the standard lens on here. So this is a little wider than standard. I'd say like about a 40 millimeter equivalent, and it still looks great for portraits. Now for this next lens, if you followed the channel for any amount of time, and hopefully you have subscribed because every other Friday we're gonna be here talking about something large format, you've probably seen me with my trusty Schneider 355mm f9 g-claron. Because this is a process lens meant for copying to large and ultra large format sheets of film, it is crazy sharp and has a very generous image circle. When I was looking to buy this almost a decade ago, I had 12x20 on my mind and I thought, okay, let's look and start assembling things that work with 12x20. The one nice thing about ultra large format proofing a purchase means I don't have to sell an old lens that doesn't work just to be able to fund probably a bigger, heavier lens that will cover. If you can amass your ULF kit over the course of time, it also hurts a lot less than slapping a big old charge on the credit card. So another thing to consider there. For field of view, this is slightly wider than that 480 I just showed you. If you're converting the look of this to full frame 35mm, it looks like about a 28mm lens, which is one of my favorites for 35. So this is another one that I plan on using a ton with this camera. This next lens is one you may have seen on the channel before, but maybe only once or twice, and that's because it's even bigger than the 480, and this is a dedicated ULF ultra wide angle lens, the Schneider Super Symmar XL 210mm f5.6. This lens has an insane 100-degree angle of view, which when stopped down just barely gets to 12x20. It's an insanely wide field of view, and I don't think I have anything on 8x10 that is as wide. I think it looks even wider than my Schneider 121 does on my 8x10. It's definitely a specialty lens, but I plan on forcing myself to use it because I love super wide angle lenses. And the weirdest thing about it, it's still a long focal length with a super wide field of view. So it's actually pretty decent at most distances. I don't suffer from extreme perspective distortion like I would in smaller formats with shorter focal length lenses. For this last ULF coverage lens, this is one that I hadn't even considered until I was cleaning up the shop/studio and I remembered, hey, I got this big old barrel lens. This is the graph variable. This was last seen on the channel in the Polaroid 8x10 episode from the fall of 2020, so it's been a while. I need to get this thing out and start shooting with it again. But the cool thing about this lens, it's a bit of a longer focal length lens. It has two focal lengths. I can rotate this front element here to change it from a 16-inch lens to an 18-inch lens, or what's that, 405mm to 475mm. It changes how soft it is, and it obviously changes the f-stop as well, but the cool thing is when I work with this at portrait distance, like my other 480, it also covers. On just about every other camera I own, this lens is too heavy, and even on the symmar, it starts to want to push things down. The cool thing about this 12x20, it's meant for heavy stuff. It's got a massive front standard, and it feels right at home on the camera. Even though I've just outlined a bunch of uphill struggles you may encounter in the ULF process, I think one of the largest ones, at least for me, was relearning the dance with my camera. Every time you add a new piece of kit to your ultra large format setup, it's really important to practice with that piece of equipment, whether it's a new lens, holder, or an entirely new system. Without relearning the dance, we lose confidence, we get scared of the camera, and even worst case scenario with big things like this, you can get hurt. And I never want to see that happen with anybody's large format process. For this particular camera, it took me 60 straight days of setting it up, tearing it down, and doing the dance. By the end of those 60 days, I was excited to take a picture, and I wasn't afraid of it anymore. You know, when you repeat something a whole bunch of times, especially over a long period of time, those habits become just ingrained, and you get used to doing things in that new way. It's way better than just doing the same thing a whole bunch of times over the course of 1 or 2 days. These are habits that you want to make, you know, relatively easy and sometimes kind of fun to do. So performing all these checks, this is just my little pre-flight checklist. The one thing I love about this Canham camera is it has all of these extra little locking points, but for every locking point there is, that's also a point of failure. So you need to make sure that everything is locked down nicely before you take a shot. A lot of the reason I wanted to get into the 12x20 format has to do with the aspect ratio. I love 4x5 and 8x10. That aspect ratio is near and dear to my heart, but I also love something slightly more panoramic. 12x20 and to a larger degree 7x17 and 8x20 are all banquet or panoramic camera formats. This one has an aspect ratio of 1.66, which puts it just ever so slightly different than the golden ratio, which sits at 1.61, a really nice perfect little curve, and I love it. Finding that golden ratio out in nature or in a portrait is such a fun thing to do and kind of makes me feel like a JoJo protagonist. Another reason I wanted to pick this up is it's been a while since I've really tackled and gotten serious about shooting environmental portraits. And I love the ability to use a wide perspective and a shallow depth of field to place a person, give context, so somebody taking in that singular frame can feel like they know someone or know some of their backstory. That's the power of photography. In order to get more comfortable with environmental portraiture with this big old thing, I called up my buddy Mr. Steven Takis. You may have seen Steven on the channel multiple times. He has the Brownie in Motion project, and he loves all things photography, DIY, and ULF. So when I told him the first shot coming out of this 12 by 20 was going to be a portrait of him, he said, sign me right up. When I headed over to his house, he was in the middle of setting up some stuff in his garden, and I thought, you know what? No, don't change. This is perfect. He had this kind of urban farmer look going on. I wanted to show folks how much into home gardening he is. So I placed him right in front of his shed with all the tools that he already had laid out. You pose a little bit when you're setting up this big old thing. And it was a challenge because I knew where he was located going in the late afternoon would have some really nice filtering light on through. I did run into a couple of challenges. The sun was lowering in the sky a little bit quicker than my skills were with the 12 by 20 still. So by the time I got things set up, I lost some of those beautiful rays of light that you're seeing on the video. But the only thing I could do to supplement that light, because I was metering for f11, was a big old flash. So we got one of Steven's Speedotron 4800 watt packs. We popped it into a softbox, and that was going to provide just enough fill so I didn't have to drag the shutter too long and blow out a lot of the details coming in from that back and side light. Once I had taken that photograph of Steven at his house, another challenge presented itself. How am I going to share this with you guys? Of course, I can just show you the video and hold up a negative, but how are you guys going to see the finished print or see what I saw in my mind's eye? Well, I had to take that negative, and once I tray processed it here at the darkroom space, I went ahead and took my negatives over to Midwest Photo and got a box of 16 by 20 paper, and I made some RC contact prints. Once I find a method that I really like for scanning these, I'll go ahead and post a link to some of my scans, but for now, this RC print is going to have to do. The film I'm using is definitely some older, more experimental film. These burned edges that are coming in here and here are actually a result of the film being previously exposed inside the box. For the haters out there, here is a video of me developing out an empty sheet of film. So I took a sheet of film right from the box, developed it out. It has an absurd amount of base fog, meaning I can silver print these, I can scan through them. I likely cannot do anything like alternative process because that base fog prevents all of that extra contrast and density of the negative from coming through. One thing I will never get over about ultra large format is the contact prints just have so much detail. Gobs of detail is coming through, and it's a contact print. You can get right up on it, you can look at it with a loupe, and it looks marvelous. This was shot with my Schneider 355mm f9, and it's wide, but it's normal because it is a normal lens, and it's that normal perspective, but I'm just seeing more of it. That's what I love about this format. Not knowing that that first shot was going to be my best one from that shoot, I flipped the film holder over and I posed Steven a little bit differently because as he put the bag down, he had kind of this interesting little bend going on, and I thought, you know what, let me try a shot like this. And this almost looks like, as funny as I thought the pose was, it does still come off and read a little bit like too posed. So I still like the first photograph a little bit better, but exposure-wise, everything came out really well, and it prints just as well as the first negative. In getting some more practice with the ULF setup, I wanted to try some more portraits, this time changing up the focal lengths a little bit. I took this combination with the 480mm lens with Lauren and the dogs, and we walked around the yard a little bit, and I tried multiple different compositions. The first one I tried with the 480, I had Lauren and the dogs go across the street from the house, and It didn't feel at the time like it was really, really wide until I looked at the ground glass, and oh my gosh, it felt like they were more than 20, 30 feet away. It felt like they were forever away. They were super tiny in the frame, and with just a tiny amount of front tilt on the lens, shooting with it wide open, I was surprised with how well it covered. The next shot I did with Lauren, Zill, and Strudel was I popped them in the driveway space, and I got relatively close. One reason I don't usually work with a 480 on my 8x10 is it's too long and I run out of bellows. This camera has more than enough bellows. I could even do 1-to-1 macro with this lens. I placed Lauren and the dogs about 7-8 feet away, and I was surprised at how nice and environmental the shot was. Depth of field was razor thin. I think I was still wide open at f8.4. The sun was a little bit lower in the sky, so there's some blown out bits in the background, but I loved how nice and even and soft the image was overall. The final shot I did with the 480mm lens was just Lauren and Strudel. I got super close. I pulled the bellows out an absurd amount, but I was super glad that I did because I framed up just from the bottom of Lauren's arms, almost all of Strudel, and just the top of Lauren's head. The image was relatively centered, and I'm not as afraid of centering images on the 12x20 as I thought I would be. And for the last test, I realized I hadn't shot anything with the 210mm lens yet, which is crazy stupid wide. But I decided if 210 was gonna look stupid wide and make somebody look ridiculous, it might as well be yours truly. So I set up the camera yet again, got really close, and I wanted to see, could I do a self-portrait with a longer throw cable release and have it turn out well with the 210? I was super surprised with how it looked. It was relatively clean. There is some perspective distortion because with a wide angle lens, the closer you get, the more crazy your features get, but it was really well controlled. I would say if you're gonna shoot with a super wide angle lens for environmental portraits, there should probably be a reason. Like you're in a very small space, like when I was doing my barbershops project all those years ago. Yes, it was a lot of effort to set up those environmental portraits, but I'm super glad that I did because now I know which lens I'm going to need for what situation. It's one thing to ask strangers' opinion on the internet, but it's a whole nother thing to put the lens on, go under the dark cloth, and take a look for yourself and say, you know what, I can see myself using this for portraits, or, no, this isn't my taste. You just have to use it. The final and possibly craziest test of working with the Canham 12x20 was seeing if I can do the other stuff I like to shoot with it, not just environmental portraiture. It's one thing to have this thing in the studio or 10 feet from the car. Can I actually travel with this camera? Am I able to do the kind of field work that I like to do? Well, to answer that, I gotta move this guy out of the way. Initially, the Canham 12x20 also came in a really nice lightware padded. Lightware makes cases for view cameras, studio strobes, C-stands, all sorts of stuff. The only downside about lightware cases, they're meant to be lugged to and from a car or loaded onto a cart. There's not a lot of solutions out there to hiking around with ultra large format setups because who would do that? Who's dumb enough to actually hike with one of those things? You're looking at them. I've had my fair share of hurting myself because of cheaping out on bags and solutions for carrying my camera stuff. So this time, I was looking for something that could adapt my giant lightware case to a backpack. There was no backpack that I could find that would actually fit this. On the large format photography forums, there were some folks talking back and forth about using things like keyboard cases and audio mixer cases, and those are nice padded case solutions, but few of those have adequate backpack straps. And when you're carrying a large load, being able to distribute that across your shoulders, the middle, and lower parts of your back is key. I had to get a little creative and look elsewhere, namely the world of military and hunting. Those folks are hauling a ton of gear and they're hauling it in a hurry. That means the gear has to be saddled correctly, balanced, and super comfortable. When I was looking those up, I talked to a few folks that used to work at outdoor stores, as well as consulted a few folks that have modified their ultra large format cameras. And one brand of bags came through to the top, and that's this company called Mystery Ranch. Happens to make a series of backpacks that have a frame system. Now this bag is probably not intended to carry a ULF camera, but with the right amount of strapping, I can balance this pack out super comfortably. And once fully assembled, the camera one holder, a couple of lenses, loop, meter, and dart cloth, that whole combination weighs about 10 pounds less than the stuff that you see me carrying around with my other fieldwork episodes. I took this tester down to Hocking Hills, to where I visited many times before at Old Man's Cave. This was right around the Memorial Day weekend, and I loved it because we had tons of rain. I visited some of the old classics at Old Man's Cave. I visited the upper falls and then headed slightly towards the middle falls. I only had 2 frames to work with, and I'm super happy with the results that I got. Let's bring it back in the frame here. There we go. So to wrap everything up, when you're looking to get into ultra large format, you're gonna run into ultra large problems. You're gonna need bigger tripod, bigger lenses, bigger coverage, big holders, a big backpack if you plan on hiking with it. Everything gets larger and riskier. Nothing is cheap in there. Everything is bespoke, custom, specialty. A lot of this can be super frustrating, but some of the joy from this can also come from those mild successes. I think for somebody considering larger than 8x10 or anything in the ULF sizes, you have to really like a few things. You gotta love that aspect ratio. This isn't something that's a maybe. If you wanna figure out if you like that aspect ratio with the gear you have, crop it. Mask your ground glass, cut off some of the film, crop into that aspect ratio regularly, and make sure you love it. These things can be a commitment, and I don't want anybody jumping into thousands of dollars worth of kit that they don't think they're gonna use very much. I expect the frequency of ultra large format Fridays being something close to what you would see with live streams here on the channel. By the way, if you're not, go ahead and get subscribed, because we're gonna have a live stream coming up here in the middle of the summer where we do some Q&A and maybe even a giveaway. So that about does it. This is the Canham 12x20. She's all mine. I still can't believe it. It's pretty awesome. I have everyone at home to thank for watching the channel, supporting, leaving those awesome comments, and of course, the ULFF Sustaining Member Program. The ULFF Sustaining Member Program is an extra way to show your support towards the content you see here on the channel. At the $1 level, you get your name in the supporter credits right here. Isn't that pretty cool? At the $5 level, you get your supporter credits as well as a handwritten thank you, me expressing my gratitude to you. It's the least I can do. At the $10 level, you get priority access to the large format questions at gmail.com inbox. That inbox has about 4 to 5 emails coming in per day. At the $10 level, that guarantees that you get priority questions answered. That priority email access is a great thing to have if you're just getting started in large format and you have a very specific burning question and you don't want to throw yourself to the wolves of social media to get a snarky answer. If you have any questions about ultra large format or anything else in the large format photographic process, please leave those down below in the comments. And for all those other questions, hit me up, largeformatquestions@gmail.com. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I hope to see you the next time for more Large Format Friday.